So, with the declaration now made that Saul will be king, and with his servant sent away to go on ahead of them, Samuel and Saul now have a private moment together. And Samuel does something very odd. He picks up a flask of oil and pours it out on Saul's head. Now, you're not surprised because you've seen that happen many times in the Bible. And also, you're not surprised because it's not your head getting soaked in oil, is it? But outside the priesthood, this has never happened before. So it's worth pausing here to ask, what exactly is going on when somebody gets oil poured out on their head in the Bible? Well, of course, it is like a living metaphor. It is designed to symbolize something that is spiritually true, and it finds its origin in an old shepherding practice that even carries on to this day. So good shepherds who love and look after their sheep would pour oil on their heads for two reasons, or two main reasons at least. Firstly, because in the summertime, flies almost terrorize the sheep. The most troubling of all is the nasal fly, which constantly buzz around the head of the sheep in an effort to land in the nasal cavity and lay their eggs there. So the oil then is like a natural repellent to these flies, and it was so effective back then that they still use it to this very day. The second reason is because rams in the flock will often fight each other by thumping their heads together. Again, that can cause some pretty serious injury, and so apart from keeping everybody separate, there's not an awful lot that can be done to stop those kind of conflicts between rams. And so the oil is used as a way of helping their heads kind of slip off one another and lessen the direct impact between them. Again, these things would be evident to Saul and to Samuel and to David because they grew up in cultures where this kind of thing was practiced. But for us, it requires perhaps a little bit more effort to understand why the pouring of oil represents God's protection and his particular care for an individual. So after that, Samuel kisses him, a symbol, of course, of Samuel's approval, his blessing upon the king who has been chosen. Now that's important as well, isn't it? Because Samuel has been the one telling the people, don't turn away from God, don't ask for a king, it won't end well for you. It's helpful to see here. He's not holding a grudge, he's not nursing a wound to his pride, he's right behind Saul, and if he can help him to succeed for the good of people and the glory of God, Samuel will do whatever he can. And so after that little private ceremony, Samuel sends him on his way and promises that certain signs will occur to authenticate the great claims that have been made. Now we read in verse 9, as Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart, and all these signs were fulfilled that day. Now what exactly that means is hard to tell, because, without going into too much detail, while Saul starts off well, he doesn't finish well, not at all. In fact, most of his life is lived as someone who is pretty hostile towards God and very volatile towards others. If you're looking for this man to produce good fruit, well, we've got to say there's not much in Saul's life overall. Now you might say, well, of course Saul belongs to the Lord. Of course he's a good guy overall. I mean, he even prophesies here. He's given words from God. And Jesus speaks exactly to that circumstance, saying, you know what, some will even prophesy in my name, and others will say, Lord, Lord, didn't we do this, that, and the other? And I will say to them on the day of judgment, depart from me, I never knew you. So some speculate then that this changing of the heart is simply God preparing him to do the job of a king, but this is not necessarily a spiritual transformation, and we know it's not because if it was, it would be evident from his life, and he doesn't live like someone who belongs to the Lord. Well, we'll find out over the coming chapters. But at the end of this chapter, we get just a sign that Saul is not perhaps as competent as we might at first have believed. He gets home and his uncle asks him, where have you been? And Saul deliberately doesn't tell him about the anointing he's received to be king. Why is that, do you think? Then, later on, Samuel calls all the people together from verse 17, and Saul is identified as being their king. And then there's this awkward moment where Saul is evidently not there among them. Now, the people assume it's for a good reason. In verse 22, they inquire of the Lord, asking, has the man not come here yet? Because all of God's people are supposed to be here. They've been called by Samuel, but he's not here. And the Lord reveals the embarrassing truth. He's hiding among the supplies. Now, perhaps the pressure is too much for him. Perhaps he doesn't want to see the people's response to him as king, whether they accept him or reject him. Perhaps knowing their demands even, back in chapter 8, we want a king who will lead us in battle. Perhaps the reality of that requirement is beginning to sink in with him. Goodness, that's a big responsibility on his shoulders, isn't it? Some things in this chapter give us great encouragement that he'll be everything Israel needs, and other things cause great doubt. Well, in the parable of the 4 soils, the truth is only revealed over time. 4 soils receive the seed. 3 soils show signs of life. 2 soils end in tragedy, and only 1 ends in triumph. And so we'll have to follow Saul's life, and that is how we will find out what kind of soil there really is under the surface.